You know, it's no secret that we've identified some lifestyle habits that are bad for us. You know, smoking, sedentary behavior, those types of things. And we know these habits can take years off of our life and reduce the quality of our life. So what if we flip that idea around and we identified lifestyle habits that are proven to add years and quality to our lives? You know what? The Blue Zones Project has done exactly that. Through their research, the Blue Zones projects have located pockets in the world where people actually live longer, happier, and healthier lives. The interesting thing is that the people that live in these blue zones have some common characteristics. And the great thing is that they're really not that complicated and things that we could all do to improve our well-being. So I've had the privilege over the years of sitting in on several Blue Zone presentations and always come away inspired with new ideas, and we hope that you do too.
So here to share with us some of those Blue Zones findings is Dan Buettner Jr., son of Blue Zones author and founder Dan Buettner. Dan Jr. is currently a Blue Zones national spokesperson and director of solutions for Blue Zones projects and Blue Zones brands real estate. He will showcase the 9 common diet and lifestyle habits that connect the Blue Zones together in longevity and health. These 9 habits could add 12 years of quality life to the average American, all through a science-backed blueprint. As Blue Zones project expert, Dan works directly with the communities who want to bring the life-changing benefits of Blue Zones programming to their people and places. And Dan will also be taking questions at the end of his presentation, so to submit your question, please use the Ask button under the chat box. And with that, welcome, Dan.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Blue Cross and Pete, for having us. I think it's great that you guys have been able to put on this summit every year for employers and employees across the state of North Dakota. When I think of work-life balance, for some reason I always go to the great comedian George Carlin, who once said, "It's not just about adding more years to your life, but also adding more life to your years." As mentioned, I work with a great team across the country that exported this work into transformational frameworks for employers and cities across the country. You're going to be hearing later today from Nick Buettner, who's going to be sharing a little bit more about how that transformation actually comes about. Today, what I'm going to be sharing with you guys is our origin story, the National Geographic story about the world's longest lived people and cultures and what they can teach each of us as individuals about how to set up our lifestyle and our environment to make the healthy choice the easy choice. I'm going to start this morning's little journey of Blue Zones by introducing my father, Dan Buettner Sr., seen here on screen. He's got the unfortunate labor of traveling around the world still to this day to communities, being invited in to the kitchens of the world's oldest grandmas and grandpas and having them cook for him, home cooking. It's a labor of love, I'm sure, for him. I'm going to take you to each of the Blue Zones this morning, all 5 of them. We're going to take a little journey around the globe. But before I do, I want to debunk a couple myths about longevity, a couple myths about well-being. The first myth that I want to debunk is this concept that if we try really, really hard, that each of us can reach age 100. Unfortunately, that is false. Only 1 in 5,000 Americans are going to reach age 100. Even though it's the fastest growing demographic, it's still very hard to do. And the reason is our evolutionary hardware. We are hardwired for something called procreative success. Procreative success might sound like a mantra for some college kids, but the concept is that we are engineered to live long enough to have kids, see our kids have kids, and then after then, the evolutionary effect starts to dissipate. So it's really, really hard to reach age 100 because we're just not hardwired for that. You really have to have both the genes and the lifestyle to reach age 100. The second myth that I want to debunk for you all this morning is that treatments exist that can slow or reverse the process of aging. Unfortunately, that's also false. There's just too much going on in our bodies. If you cut your brain off from oxygen for just a little bit, those O2 cells die, they don't come back. If you play too much pickleball or too much tennis, the cartilage in your knee deteriorates, it doesn't come back. Arteries get clogged, brains get foggy. There are 35 trillion with a T, cells in our body. And every 5 years, those cells recycle and recycle and recycle. And this goes on almost like a Beatles cassette tape. Remember those Beatles cassette tapes? You circle it around with your friends, they burn it. And by the time it gets back to you, it doesn't sound so great. The same is happening to our cells. So much so that the cells in a 65-year-old's body are aging at a rate of 125 times faster than a 12-year-old is. So there's actually not treatments that you can do that is going to slow or reverse the process of aging. So wait a second, Dan, you join us this morning, and the first thing you do is tell us that we probably aren't going to reach age 100, and there's not much for treatments that we can do to slow the process of aging. Kind of a buzzkill after the great music that we heard this morning. But the reason I give the speech and the reason why this is such a good story to tell is because we know that the average shelf life of the human body is about 90 years. In America, we're living to about 78 years. So somewhere along the line, we're leaving 12 good years on the table. So the premise of Blue Zone was, let's go and find places around the world where they're getting those good 12 years and then some. And let's figure out what they're doing. What are the commonalities? We call them the Power Nine across all these communities that we can maybe adopt here in our communities, engineer into our homes so that we can get those 12 good years back. So on screen are our 5 Blue Zones. I'm going to take you to each one of those here today. Before I do, I want to share a couple kickers. Kicker number 1 is that 4 out of 5 of the dots on the map are at or below the poverty line. So the secret here, these places that have people reaching age 100 at 10x what we are in the United States, and they're doing it with a fraction of the rates of Alzheimer's, hypertension, diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, hip fractures, depression. They're doing all this without great healthcare, without wonderful healthcare facilities or assisted living or pharmacies, strongly suggesting that what they have are what I call best practices from our species on how to set up your community, your home, your work site, your social networks, your rituals, finding and practicing purpose. The second kicker on these dots is of the 250 100-year-olds that we've been studying for 20 years, and you guys are going to get to meet a couple of them here today, not a single one ever pursued health. Not a single one ever woke up and said, I'm going to join the gym. I'm going to get on that South Beach diet. It ensued. Longevity ensued. Health ensued. Mental well-being. It all happened to them, unconscious to them. And therein we thought was the lesson. And that's why we thought it was so important to document not just their story and their environment, but the Power Nine, the 9 commonalities, which I'm going to share with you guys. So this is all written up in a series of New York Times bestselling books, National Geographic cover stories. There's even 3 new books coming out in partnership with National Geographic, now owned by Disney, that continues to tell the Blue Zone story. Good news for all of you on this summit today. You guys don't have to go out and buy any of this because we're going to share with you today all the lessons and the stories right now. So we brought a team along with National Geographic and my father on the original expeditions. We brought a team of epidemiologists and demographers from across the United States to make sure that this work wasn't just part of a fancy story and an inspirational story, that it's actually documented, that it's actually research and grounded in evidence. Our first Blue Zone is 160 miles off the coast of Italy on the island of Sardinia. Here we have the world's longest lived men on the earth. In America, I mentioned we get one 100-year-old for every 5,000 births. On this island, we get 6 100-year-olds for every 1,000 births. Strongly suggests that they're an anomaly. There's something going on here. Now, it's not the whole island, actually, that is a blue zone. It's the highlands that is a blue zone. Here in the highlands, we have 14 villages clustered together. It's about 42,000 people. It's a society that's been incubated really since the Bronze Age, since the time of Christ. And it's here that we have 102-year-old men riding a bike, chopping wood, and beating a guy 50 years younger in an arm wrestle. This, by the way, video was taken at 7 a.m. after a tumbler of wine. These men are truly an anomaly. And we were not the first people to study these men. They were actually the subject of an epidemiological study done by the University of Rome, in which they interviewed and surveyed over 300 of these Sardinian highland men. And they found 3 commonalities that these men all had. The first was barley consumption. Actually, they all ate a lot of barley, which we thought was pretty interesting. The second commonality was the men who had 5 or more daughters tended to live longer than their neighbors, 5 or more daughters. And we don't know if that's because daughters tend to take care of their aging parents as they age, or if because any man that can survive 5 adolescent daughters is surefire to survive anything. The third commonality that these men had, and this is the one that Blue Zone's team really seized upon, is their profession. Their profession. The men in the lowlands of the island of Sardinia are not Blue Zone. And the lowlands are really good for agriculture. They're really good for farming. And so you see professions of the men, the Sardinian men in the lowlands, that is farming. And for those of you who are familiar with farming up in North Dakota, I'm sure it's 1 degree of separation, 2 degrees, 3 degrees of separation, like in Minnesota, where I'm from. Farming has a very arduous planting and harvesting season, but it's got a very sedentary growing season where there's not a lot of physical activity happening. Juxtaposed to those men on the lowland, in the highlands, our Blue Zone centenarians in Sardinia, their job is they're herders. The land is not very good for farming because of the topography and the climate. So they've collected a career of herding, which occasions basically walking a 5K every single day their whole lives, sometimes for 2 weeks on end, and they suffer a fraction of the rate of hip fractures than our peers. It's here that we saw our first Power 9, which is move naturally. They do this sometimes 2 weeks at a time. They're out there with their friends, with their sons, with their daughters. Occasionally their wives join them, walking every single day, being outside, getting vitamin D. As you can imagine, this has lent itself to a unique diet, a portable diet. They actually have a bread made from durum wheat they call pan de musica. We had it tested. And this bread, which recipe is incidentally on the Blue Zone's website, actually reduces your glycemic load versus most bread that we might consume, which makes our glycemic load skyrocket. In addition to a healthy bread choice, they do eat some dairy. Although unlike here in the Midwest, instead of corn-fed cow's dairy, they're eating grass-fed sheep's dairy, which has got the perfect combination of omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids instead of just heavy omega-6 fatty acids, which is the case in most corn-fed American-style dairy. They have a great cheese that's made from this grass-fed dairy called Pecorino cheese. It's delicious. Our second Power 9 is Plant Slant. So across all the Blue Zones that you're going to see this morning, heavy emphasis on plant-based food. About 95% of their diet is plant-based. These men eat a lot of fava beans, a lot of barley, and a lot of nuts. They are always snacking on nuts all day long. They do eat a little bit of protein. They get really excited when they get to eat that protein. Usually it's around the Sabbath on Sunday, but it's usually only about the size of a deck of cards. So it's really a side, a condiment on their plate as opposed to the central piece. Good news for many Americans, they drink lots of wine. They like their happy hour. Sardinian men everywhere are drinking wine, usually 1 or 2 glasses every single day. And what's special about how they ferment their wine, they got kind of special wine. You can see nothing like muddy boots to add terroir, as the video showed. But here's something special. They keep the skins and the seeds of the grapes in the fermentation process. And it turns out that the skins and the seeds is where all the good stuff is, where all the antioxidants are, where all the blood scrubbing flavonoids exist. So this wine is literally medicine, and it's a medicine that they apply regularly. Just as important as moving naturally and plant slant and wine at 5, which is one of our Power 9, is how they're treated. You ever notice these days how all the influencers on Instagram and TikTok are younger and younger? Here in this community, the influencers are the older you get. So you walk into a pub and everybody surrounds the 100-year-old men and women. They're treated, they're kept close to home, they're treated as the elders should be treated, they're revered, and they're expected to continue to have responsibility in their community. They're given purpose. So you see these 100-year-old men tending to their vineyards, helping gardening, passing on the art of being a herder, or passing down the recipes that exist with the women down to younger generations. They volunteer on city foot patrols. They volunteer on city council. They're given roles and responsibility, purpose late into their years. And it's here that we first saw something that the World Health Organization identified before Blue Zones called the grandmother effect. The grandmother effect is a phenomenon that's found in many amphibious mammals that suggests that households, family units that have a grandparent present, the children exhibit much lower rates of childhood infirmity and disease and higher education rates. What Blue Zones documented is there's a corollary effect for grandma and grandpa. They live 4 to 6 years longer when they're kept close to the home. So one of our Power 9 is loved ones close. Our next Blue Zone is all the way across the planet on the archipelago of Okinawa, Japan. This place has long been called the land of the immortals. It's another heterogeneous population, so it's not homogeneous. They've been intermarrying with the rest of the South Pacific and Southeast Asia for thousands and thousands of years. So again, it's not about the genes. It's about lifestyle. It's here that we have the world's longest lived women than anywhere else on the planet. They have what we want. They live a really long time, and they tend to die fast, often in their sleep, and often after sex. I don't get into the methodology that went into that research, so I'll just take my father and the Nat Geo team's word for it. But the point remains, they have what we want. They die, they live really long, and they die really fast. In the United States, those of us on this summit today will spend 90% of our total life healthcare dollars in the last 5 to 7 years of our life. It's not a really good time to be around. We're sick, we're hooked up to a lot of monitors, we're taking a lot of pills, and we're spending a lot of money on healthcare. It's called the morbidity period. Well, these women in Okinawa, their morbidity period is compressed to under a year. So they live really long, they die really fast. They have 7 good years longer than the average American. There's 5 times as many 100-year-olds, and they have 1/5 the rates of breast and colon cancer and cardiovascular disease, big killers of Americans. And by the way, the number 1 and number 2 biggest killers of Americans during the pandemic was not COVID. COVID was number 3. Number 1 and 2 was preventable cancers and cardiovascular disease. These women, their lives, their hobbies, their recreation revolves around their gardens. They're constantly in their gardens doing squats basically all day long, getting down and off the ground, tending to their gardens, which of course their gardens turn around and take care of them. Some vegetables that we recognize, some vegetables that are new to us. This is called the Goya melon. They chop it up, they put it in their stir fries. It's delicious. And it actually has been shown to clean the blood and kill certain cancer-causing cells. Just as important as what they put into the mouth is how much. So they have strategies to limit their caloric intake, to stop when they're 80% full. In America, we know that isolation kills. Isolation is just as dangerous as a smoking habit, according to the Robert Woods Johnson Foundation. In Okinawa, they have strategies to keep people together. They call them moais. Every 5-year-old boy and 5-year-old girl in this community gets brought down to the town center, to the square, and they're put into a group of 5 or 6 boys, 5 or 6 girls, and they're going to travel through life together. They're going to journey through life as a unit, taking care of one another. This group of gals have been in a moai for over 95 years. Average age is 101 and a half years on the screen. And they still get together every week, gossip about their kids and grandkids, drink sake, and argue about who that hot guy liked more in 1952. But what's really special about this is these girls are in it for each other. If one of these gals doesn't show up for their weekly sake, the other girls put on their kimonos, they put on their sandals, they shuffle down the street and go in and check on their friend. It's a cultural institution. It's not a program. 2 most dangerous years for an American's life is the year where we were born because of infant complications, and the year we retire. Those of you who are in HR on this call, one of the most dangerous years statistically for an American is the year we retire. Is that because we retire and we pick up a free solo rock climbing habit or a cow tipping habit? No, it's because of purpose. It's because so many Americans retire and they turn it off. And atrophy of the spirit leads to atrophy of the mind, leads to atrophy of the body. Too many Americans die within 6 months of retirement. In Okinawa and many of the blue zones, they don't have a word for retirement. It's literally not in their dialect. Instead, they have a vocabulary for purpose, not just knowing your purpose, but articulating it. This 104-year-old Kung Fu master's purpose, they call it Ikigai, is passing on the art of Kung Fu to younger generations. This 98-year-old's Ikigai or purpose is every morning he wakes up at the crack of dawn, puts on his spandex and his bamboo goggles, and he goes spearfishing. And he uses that catch to go visit his great-grandkids, which they use for their school lunch later that day. It occasions a visit to the family unit. There's another guy who could beat my father in an arm wrestle after a little sake in the morning. And this is Kamada-san, 102 years old. She's holding her great-great-great-granddaughter. These 2 gals are separated in age by over 100 years. Her Ikigai is her granddaughter. We asked her what it feels like to hold a descendant 3 generations removed. And she responded like leaping into heaven. So it was only a matter of time before the editor at National Geographic said, guys, we need to find the American blue zone. And for a while, we thought we found it on the plains of Minnesota, up where we are all from, in the heartland. But it turns out that when you pulled back the layers of the onion, that the numbers were artificial, that all the young people had just left, leaving an artificial number of the world's oldest old. Instead, we found our American blue zone in Southern California, down the San Bernardino Highway in the city of Loma Linda, California. And you get off the highway, take the first exit, and the first thing you see on your left is a wiener hut and on your right, a Del Taco. And you've arrived at America's Blue Zone. And you're like, wait a second, what's going on here? How could this be a blue zone? Well, it turns out that embedded in this larger city is a subset, a sub-community of Seventh-day Adventists that live there. These Seventh-day Adventists are a denomination of Christianity. They're unique because even though they're not geographically isolated, they can be a little bit culturally isolated. And they evangelize with health. They don't smoke. They don't drink pop, coffee, or alcohol. They take their diet right out of the Bible. Genesis chapter 1, stanzas 24 to 28, all the trees that bear fruit, all the plants that bear seeds. They talk about legumes. They talk about beans and greens and nuts. Ostensibly missing his reference to animal protein. Once again, we weren't the first people to study the Adventists. The Adventists were subject to a 40-year study by Harvard School of Public Health. They followed over 100,000 Seventh-day Adventists over 30 years. And they found that, yes, they are, in fact, an anomaly right here in America. Women, Seventh-day Adventist women living 9 years longer than other Americans. And for men, the disparity is even bigger. And these are people who are living right across the street from us. They're living, driving down the same fast food riddled streets that we are, and yet somehow they're getting better results. They're able to resist it. Once again, a community that can teach us something, and a community that is not homogeneous. This is, once again, a cultural melting pot. Seventh-day Adventists are Black, brown, Asian, Hispanic, white, all the way down the line. It's not about genetics. It's about lifestyle and environment. One of the unique things here is they celebrate their Sabbath on Saturday instead of Sunday. They're very religious about their church. And indeed, we found that most of our centenarians did go to some type of faith-based organization and showed up 4 times per month. We show that that's one of our Power 9 because you live 4 to 8 years longer when you belong to a faith-based organization and show up. For the Seventh-day Adventists, after or before church, they take a trip into nature, usually a hike, although the definition of a hike has evolved over time. But the point remains, they're moving naturally while spending time with people that have healthy habits that are contagious. They get together, they have healthy food potlucks. This community has given us a guy by the name of Ellsworth Wareham. He's a Seventh-day Adventist, multimillionaire, 96 years old, Seventh-day Adventist. He was quoted $4,000 to build a fence on his property in Loma Linda. And even though he's multimillionaire, he said, you know what, for that kind of money, I'll do it myself. So sure enough, while the cameras were rolling for the next 3 days, Ellsworth was out there in the Southern California heat, pushing wheelbarrows, digging footings, and putting in the lumber for his fence. And as you might imagine, at the end of that 3rd day, Ellsworth ended up in the OR, in the operating room. But that's not Ellsworth on the table. That's Dr. Ellsworth Wareham on the left, who at the age of 96 was performing open heart surgery 4 times per month. This story was so viral that Dr. Oz actually picked it up for his show. Dr. Oz, of course, being a doctor, was able to travel down, suit up in his scrubs, and actually go into the OR with Dr. Wareham and watch this. Afterwards, Dr. Oz came out of the OR, ripped his mask, and said, "That was incredible. How do you do it?" And Ellsworth said, "I don't hang out with old folks." These Seventh-day Adventists have also given us 100-year-old pilots, 101-year-old people who start their day swimming, and 98-year-olds who end the day by throwing up rooster tails and water skiing. This is how you want to be. This is how you want to age. This is, as George Carlin said, adding more life to your years. And finally, we have Marge Jeton, a Seventh-day Adventist, 104 years old. She's the only one that we studied of the 250 100-year-olds over 20 years who actually exercised in the gym, wakes up every morning, lifts weights, gets on her bicycle, and starts the day off with a prune juice shooter. I don't recommend that, but it works for Marge. Marge volunteers at 6 different organizations every single day. She's constantly on the move in her root beer colored Cadillac. My father asked her what the body feels like at 104. And she thought about it for a second and she responded, well, I'll tell you what, I felt a lot sexier at 102. So this was all written up in the first National Geographic cover story. It created a windfall, which, of course, like good explorers, we immediately went and found 2 more blue zones around the world. The Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica. This is a special community. Actually, as a matter of fact, if you reach age 50 in this community, you have the highest probability of reaching age 100 than anywhere else in the world. And once again, we see a community that's not rich in resources and infrastructure, and yet they're getting way better results than we are in the United States, which, by the way, we spend $3.5 trillion for the worst results. This is Doña Panchita, 105 years old when this picture was taken. I got to personally visit her home. She's got dirt floors. She lives in a hut, no windows. She's got citrus and wild peppers growing in her backyard. And we got to spend the day with her. And while we were there, something weird happened. About 35 villagers of all ages, from 3 years old to 90 years old, showed up on her front stoop while we were there. And we finally asked who those people were. Come to find, every single one was a relative of hers. So while it seemed like she was kind of a hobbit, she was very, very, very connected to the community. Once again, a plant-based diet, a Mesopotamian diet, lots of beans, lots of citrus, lots of nuts, lots of water, lots of coffee, lots of squash. This is another Nicoyan 100-year-old, Don Bonifacio, 102 years old. He's a working cowboy. Every day he wakes up with his sons and grandsons. They put machetes on their belts, their waistline, and they ride out and clear shrub from the land that surrounds their property, which is absolutely worthless, but it gives them a sense of purpose to go out and clear the shrub and spend time together. He likes to brag about his 68-year-old girlfriend, who, as he says, is kind of hot. This isn't Don Bonifacio. This is one of his sons, but their horses are centenarians too. This is Corazon, who's 100 years old in horse years as well. And our final blue zone, all the way in the Aegean Sea off the coast of Turkey, is Ikaria, Greece. This place has been geographically isolated for hundreds and hundreds of years. They didn't have ports until just before World War I. Very isolated community, but they have 100-year-olds. They have a culture that's very high in well-being. They have something they can teach us, often referred to as the island where people forget to die. They have the purest form of the Mediterranean diet than anywhere else on the planet. Once again, we see a lot of move naturally. These people's culture revolves around their gardens, their vineyards. Cars are absent. So everywhere occasions a walk. And when you're walking, you cannot avoid neighbors, family members, friends. So it's a community, it's an environment that's set up that the healthy choice, the connectivity choice, the mental well-being choices are the defaults. You can't avoid them. This picture was taken at a wedding at 2 a.m. The man on the left is 82 years old. The man on the right is 86 years old. I don't even think they were invited to this wedding. And yet they show up and they're partying way into the night with the rest of the community. It's here that we met a special centenarian by the name of Stomaitis Moriartis. Stomaitis Moriartis, he was a World War II veteran. He deployed to theater in Italy, got hit by a mortar, mangled his arm up, couldn't get good health care. So he got on a freighter to North America, got the health care he needed, ended up meeting a Greek American girl marrying her, having 3 sons, settling down in the suburbs of Detroit, started living the American dream, set up a pretty successful painting business, bought himself a Chevrolet, had a pretty good life. One day in the 70s, he had trouble going up the stairs. He was short of breath. He finally went into the doctor. Doctor told him he had terminal lung cancer. He would be dead in 6 months. He went to 2 other doctors. Same thing. Terminal lung cancer, he'd be dead in 6 months. He was devastated, as you can imagine. After about a month of feeling sorry for himself, he decided, I'm going to move back to Korea. I'm going to move back there. If I die there, the burial costs will be a fraction of what they'll be in the United States. My children and my wife will have more to inherit. I'll reconnect. So he does that, moves back in with his kids at the age of 60. So those of you who have college kids who are at home right now, it could be worse. It could be 60-year-old kids coming back to move in with you. After a while, being home, he connects with his old friends, his culture, starts breathing the air, and he starts feeling pretty good. He says, you know what? I'm going to plant a vineyard. So he plants a vineyard. He knows he's not going to be around to drink it, but his wife and his children can drink it, and they can think of him, and he loves that thought. Fast forward to 2005, when Dan Buettner Sr. and National Geographic show up, and there's Stomites, 100 years old, producing 200 liters of wine a year and drinking most of it all himself. Still kicking it. He's alive. And my father asked him, what's your secret? What's your secret? And we were pretty sure his secret was not his ability to match plaid outfits. And his response was, I don't know. I guess I just forgot to die. And it sounds flippant, but he nailed it. He absolutely nailed it. He put words to what we were seeing, which is people all across these blue zones who weren't pursuing health or well-being. It just happened to them. It happened because their environment and their lifestyle all imbued the power 9. And I'm going to do a little recitation of the Power 9 for you. But I really encourage you to join the next hour where Nick Buettner, who's actually one of the co-founders of the Blue Zones, is going to go through how do we import these Power 9 into our homes, our schools, our work sites, and our communities so we can mimic what we saw in these Blue Zones, which is populations getting healthier and happier without even knowing it. So the Power 9, number 1, move naturally. I talked a lot about this. These aren't places with gyms. These are places with deconvenienced homes. They don't have a button for everything. They're places where it's easy to walk and bike and connect, where people are unconsciously nudged every hour to move for 10 or 20 minutes. That rests on a bed of the right outlook. I mentioned a lot of these places are at or below the poverty line. So they have stress, they worry about money, they worry about their kids, but they have ways to articulate their purpose, to volunteer. They have ways to downshift, to reverse the damage that is associated with stress. Some of that downshifting is ancestor veneration, which is what the Okinawans do. Some of it's yoga, and some of it is just happy hour, like many of our centenarians do. Obviously, they have a very different diet than most Americans do. Wine at 5, good news for most Americans, 1 or 2 glasses, always over a healthy dinner, always with friends. And no, you cannot save up and have 14 glasses of wine on the weekends. It doesn't work that way. Plant slant, 95% plant-based food, nuts, beans, fruits, those are power foods in Blue Zone's world. Beans, by the way, pound for pound, pack more protein than a steak, and they're much cheaper. The trick is getting it all to taste good. And we have a whole bunch of free recipes on our website, bluezones.com. And then 80% rule. Obviously, we all know what obesity's done in America. So ways to stop and limit the defaults of how much we connect. And this all rests on a foundation of connection, putting loved ones first, belonging to the right tribe. We know that habits are as contagious as a cold. So we have strategies to help people not dump their unhealthy buddies, but maybe augment with the right ones. And I'll tell you right now that if you can set up people, places, and policy, which Nick is going to talk more about, to make the healthy choice the easy choice, to make it imbued with these Power 9, you'll transform your life. And with that, I'm done. And I'm more than happy to use the remainder of time to talk a little bit, answer questions with you all about how we can bring the Power 9 into our lives and our workplaces.
Thank you, Dan. That is fascinating information, and we're excited to roll into some of these questions coming in. So I guess first one is, what have you personally learned from the Blue Zone that you've incorporated into your life?
Yeah, great question. Number one thing I've learned is if you want to start eating better and cooking better, I've got a wife and kids, so we eat at home a lot, is you got to know that the most essential ingredient in a healthy dish is taste. You got to learn how to make it taste good, or else nobody's going to eat it. So what my family and I have done is, and by the way, we're Minnesotans. My wife's from Iowa. We were raised a certain way with standard American diet, is practicing and experimenting with new dishes, new healthy dishes. And some of them are misses, but some of them are hits. Taste good. Our kids, our toddlers actually eat them. And by experimenting, we've now got 4 or 5, maybe even 7 different new healthy dishes that are part of our repertoire. And I know everybody on this call has a repertoire of meals that they regularly go to in their house. So finding the taste ingredient and experimenting it to get it into the family repertoire.
Well, first of all, thanks, Dan. That was always fascinating information. Every time I listen to a Blue Zones presentation, I come away just inspired and with some great new ideas. I do want to say that as a father of 3 daughters, I was very excited to hear about what you said about the father of daughters and extending their lifetime. So thank you for adding that in. One question I had was, it seems to be, you said no one in these Blue Zones really pursues health. What does that really mean?
It's funny. We, as part of interviewing over 243 100-year-olds over 20 years, we always ask them the question, how are you living so long, so healthy? And they all have an answer, but they're almost always wrong on that answer. And when I say they didn't pursue it, it's really something that happened to them as a byproduct. It's like saying that Americans pursued being the most obese, unhealthy population in the industrialized world. Of course not. None of us pursued that. It's just a factor of a car-centric society. It's a factor that Madison Avenue in New York City spends $10 billion a year on marketing firms that make processed foods, salty foods, sweet foods unavoidable for us. Life gets in the way. One of the things that marketers know is that discipline is a muscle, and muscles fatigue. And so if we really want to set ourselves up for success, we have to do what the Blue Zones did, which is create environments, social networks, societies which you can engineer so that the defaults nudge us into healthy choices. And that's how you get something that can actually sustain for decades. And Nick, I know, is going to talk a little bit more about that science.
Another interesting question we just got in is, what is the ease of access to healthcare or quality healthcare in the Blue Zones?
Well, again, Nick's going to talk about the juxtaposition of how we think of healthcare and treatment and disease management versus how it's just been a phenomenon in the Blue Zones community. But 4 out of 5 of these places really don't have much in the way of a healthcare complex. They spend 1/15 of what we spend on healthcare. And so access to healthcare, I think, is really important, especially when you think about social determinants of health here in the United States. It's part of the puzzle, but if what you're driving towards is a healthier, more productive, more resilient community, the clinical work is only part of the puzzle. Population health lives where the population lives and works and plays and prays. And so I totally think access to care is part of the puzzle. But if you really want outcomes that are bigger than just health outcomes, but really community outcomes that last in posterity for all future generations, you really gotta make sure that when people leave the clinics, that they're set up for success, where they're going to spend most of their life, at work, at play, at home.
So, Danny, one thing you mentioned that was kind of interesting is none of these centurions or these blue zone individuals actually went to the gym. So are you saying that natural movement is really just as good as going to the gym?
Yes. I'll be the first to admit I'm guilty of this. A lot of Zoom calls. I'm part of the Zoom culture. I try to take as many calls as I can walking when people don't need to see my face. But this idea of being at the gym for an hour every day, but then spending 23 hours sitting in front of a screen, watching TV, sleeping, 23 hours of sedation, it just leads to atrophy of the body. It just really does lead to atrophy of the body, despite how good of an hour routine that we have at the gym. And atrophy of the body, I believe, leads to atrophy of the mind and spirit. So setting yourself up or your work site up or your household up so that you're kind of nudged to take the stairs, to park further away from the building and walk, to get hobbies like gardening. Those things that are going to nudge you unconsciously are going to stave off atrophy of the body, I think, much more so than just checking a box at the gym for an hour a day.
Mm-hmm. So Dan, were each of the Power 9 present in all of the Blue Zones communities, or is it just having a combination of some of those that makes those communities so much healthier? Or is there maybe even a certain subset or combination of the Power 9 that are maybe more important than others? Yeah,
great question. I actually haven't heard that question before, the first part of that question before. I've only been to 2 of the 5 blue zones, Nicoya and Ikaria. So I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure all 9 are present everywhere to some degree. But I'll tell you this, to your second question. I, by far, personally believe that the most critical Power 9 is purpose, by far. If you don't have purpose and you don't have a reason to get up in the morning, something that moves you that's not just like a paycheck, then you're not really going to have a reason to care about eating right, connecting with people, putting loved ones first, moving naturally. So I think if people can meditate on their purpose, and here's the key, figure out how to articulate their purpose. That's an important piece of this, is articulating it, and then deliberately find ways to practice their purpose. You'll have the fulcrum to want to go out and leverage the other 8 Power 9. So I think purpose. I put a differential weight on purpose personally.
Danny, I love the concept of these moais that you talk about, groups of people that have actually been friends for life. So I really think that speaks to the power of social connections. Can you talk about how important that is for longevity?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely critical. I mean, so many people think about wellness, right? Wellness, and I encourage people to make the pivot to well-being. Because there's a lot more science in well-being, and there's a lot more that tells us that if you can move the needle on well-being, you're going to get better outcomes, including business outcomes, lower turnover, higher performance, higher productivity. I don't want to take from Nick's speech. He's going to talk about this. But wellness is really limited to the physical dimension. I could have a 6-pack, but be very far away from well-being. I could be isolated. I could have a smoking habit. So the idea of moais, the idea of having a curated group of people that either you're born into, if you're lucky enough, or that you deliberately go out and curate. That's going to be critical to sustainable, healthy habits, practicing purpose, volunteering together, being there for one another. In 1970, the average American had 3 best friends. 3 best friends. Somebody that they could talk to on a bad day, have a meaningful chat with, and that they actually liked that person. Today in America, we're down to 1.5. 1.5. And I'm scared to see what the data shows post-pandemic. So isolation kills. Isolation kills. It hurts us. It deteriorates our fabric. I think it manifests in a lot of different ways that you might read on news stories. So Moai's getting with people that are going to be with you on a healthy, purposeful journey is also really critical to actual transformation of your life and those around you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Do we have time for one more question?
Yep.
All right. So one of the participants asked, for Sardinia, were the women having the same benefits as the men of Sardinia in terms of longevity?
Yes. It helps if the men were gone for sometimes weeks at a time. But the women actually rule the roost. They are the boss of the house. And I happen to know that they wield a pretty nasty rifle every now and then. The women, they rule the roost, but they also rule the cultural cuisine. So they drink as much wine as the guys, which helps. But they also know all these recipes that have been handed down from generation to generation. For a long time, they weren't even written down. They were just things that were passed on from mother to daughter to granddaughter. And a lot of these recipes are healthy. They're Mediterranean. They actually create the durum bread, the pan de musica, from bacteria that's called lactobacillus, which is why the glycemic load goes down when you eat it versus going up. So the women are also a phenomenon there. I don't know if there's as many 100-year-olds pro rata as the men, but I do know for a fact that it's a blue zone because so many more 100-year-olds there, both men and women, than the rest of the planet.
Okay, one last question. I don't know if this necessarily has to do with the blue zones or not, Danny, but I'm going to ask it to you anyway. A question came in early in the chat. Explain Tom Brady.
Well, it helps when you can pay to have a private chef that's going to cook delicious vegan food for you all day long, every day. So that helps. But I guess he's just the GOAT.
Well, thank you, Danny. That was fascinating. And if you have more questions to ask Danny or Nick, please continue to put those in the chats, and we'll try to get those answered for you. So thank you, Danny, for being here.